I think most of you know these three people, but before we get started, I want to ask three very quick, brief comments. Please take a moment and either silence your phones, turn them off, or put them in your pockets. As you know, they're very distracting. Second, I have found out from all three of them, they are all staying, so please feel free to join us in the rotunda afterwards, where there will be book signings, and you can kibitz and talk and ask questions.
That's like chutzpah.
Third, remember there's a donation box in the back of the room if you feel so inclined. Don't feel like you have to, but if you feel so inclined, there's a donation box. The money you put there helps defray the costs for us to bring in other speakers. Fourth, welcome and thank you for coming to the Hudson Library to hear these three individuals. All three of them are authors in their own right, but only one of them has multiple Pulitzer Prizes.
No, one Pulitzer. Just one. Sorry. Sorry.
And one trivia note, only one of them is currently an honorable sitting senator in the United States Congress. In 115 years of this institution, he is the first sitting senator to visit Hudson, Ohio and speak at our library. And he crossed our continent, I mean he is from Oregon, to come here. Without further ado, please, one more time, welcome these wonderful individuals, and I hope you enjoy listening to them chat.
Thank you. So I want to explain that we're here for Ron, but I'm sitting between them because these two get into these side conversations. So I'm going to try to keep things moving here, but I think Sherrod's going to start. He wants to introduce Ron. And also just...
No going into my shady past.
Oh, darn. I want to thank, this is an incredible turnout. We are so proud to be here and to see this wonderful reception for our friend. So thank you so much. And we just went through an overspill room, right? There are more people in another room, and I want them to know how much we appreciate them as well. All right, go ahead, honey.
Thank you. And I said to Gwen on the way, in 18 years she had a chance to invite me to this library so I could be the first sitting. And now she invites Ron Wyden. And she lectured me when I came in.
So this is exactly why I'm sitting between them.
No, this is about Gwen for a second.
No, leave Gwen alone. She's been wonderful. Get started.
Ron got here an hour ago and Gwen was wonderful.
Yes, and he's jealous of all the time he had with Gwen.
Because I didn't realize that John Brown started here.
Oh,
I've been to Hudson like 10 times. I can't believe I'm acknowledging,
I guess we're seeing why he was never
acknowledging my
invited.
ignorance, but I've been to Hudson. Anyway, thank you, Gwen. And thanks to all of you, and thanks for the warm reception. Many of you were so helpful last year, and thank you for that. And we got a lot of work to do in this country to take our country back. So thank you for your public spiritedness. So we're here to talk about Ron Wyden's book. I've read it. I assume many of you are getting it and reading it, and you all should. But I want to say two things about Ron, then Connie's going to ask the first question. Yeah. I've known Ron now for 30 plus years. I came to the House when he was in the House, but he was about ready to run for the Senate when I came to the House. And, you know, there are a lot of politicians that do a lot of good things and a lot of elected officials that pour their heart out and fight for the right things, but few of them are ahead of their times as much as Ron Wyden. I want to give you two examples of how he did something long before the country, or at least many elected officials, were moving in that direction. He was the first U.S. Senator to advocate for marriage equality many, many years ago, and that's worth applauding. And we look with trepidation on what Robert Kennedy, and more so the president and vice president, are doing to public health internationally. You should all read the Atul Gawande interview by David Remnick in the New Yorker about what's happening internationally, and some of you are nodding and know that. But we've had a lot of victories in this world in public health, eradicating polio, eradicating smallpox, almost eradicating essentially TB in this country. All those are under threat, as you know. But Ron Wyden played a role in something that he doesn't get much credit for. He essentially was the guy that launched the public health efforts that have saved literally millions of lives on tobacco. And you remember, you think about, you know, it wasn't some of you are old enough to remember people smoking on planes, and then they had that goofy way of you can't smoke behind this row. But you just remember my dad was a family doctor. He used to smoke in the office. I mean, people smoked all kinds. And look at this public health. Well, Ron is a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee. I got on later, but Ron did this earlier than that. Ron was the one that brought in the tobacco executives were in front of the committee, and Ron asked them if nicotine were addictive. And under oath, they all lied. And that was really the beginning of the end, and Ron Wyden was the guy who gets the most credit for taking that very, very, very powerful interest group industry on. And that tells you a lot about his spirit. It tells you a lot about how we can win when it looks like we can't, taking on powerful interest groups. And that's why he's one of my best friends because I like him so much, but that's why he's such a good U.S. Senator. This book will help to advance that. So Ron, welcome to Hudson, home of John Brown.
What?
Gwen, I can't convince Gwen that John Brown is my 13th cousin once removed. She wouldn't buy that.
This happened 10 minutes ago.
And then,
We have never had this conversation in our family.
And there was a debate. There was a debate that started about who was a bastard Brown. So
Okay, let's move on.
Much to be discussed. But since this is a night about letters, I would like to just show the new issue of the New Republic out by Sherrod. Sherrod Brown on his party in the working class. And Sherrod's point, and I'm just so thrilled to be here with Connie and Sherrod, they are the bionic duo. They are on every good cause that I know of. And particularly this article focuses on Sherrod's record in terms of the dignity of work and the fact that he's been at it for years and years. And I just wanted to start this off because we touch on it in the book, is that political change in America is not linear. You don't just go from point A to point B once and call it a day and you're ready to take the rest of the day off. Sherrod has been out there for working people for years and years, so he has been able to deal with this roller coaster and shows up at the most magical kind of times. I mean, we basically wrote the book before Sherrod had come up with this incredibly important Social Security win on his last day in the Senate. You know about that? That's the Social Security fairness. And I want to link this to the chutzpah question because it really takes the very definition of chutzpah, grit and nerve and willing to stick to it, to stay there for working people at a time when we know that the White House is not going to be inhabited by somebody who gets up every day and says working people are number one. They're getting up and saying, how many more tax breaks can we give to billionaires? And we'll talk a little bit about that. But I thought about who it would be great to have for this program, and I said, probably Oprah, LeBron James, and here are two people who are more popular than either of them. So we Jews sometimes say that we are shot in the tuchus with your rear end with good luck, and I am such a person to have these two as friends, and particularly to be in Ohio tonight to have some fun with what I know is going to be a fantastic evening. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Ron. Ron, I read dedications to books. I always like to see what people are focusing on. And you can see what I focused on because I want to note how many women are in this audience, how many women I hear from day in and day out, how many we were doing our own little tour during the Senate campaign with women with Heather Cox Richardson. Some of you may have been with that. We did, I think, 5 events. So I'm giving you sort of the preamble why, you'll understand why I'm asking this question, because I want to read the first part of your dedication in your book. To the memory of my mom, Edith, my grandmother, Helen, and all the strong Jewish women in Germany in the 1930s who saw clearly the Nazi threat so badly underestimated by their husbands and sons. Isn't that powerful. I have never seen such a bald and bold declaration about what women knew, right? And I've spent a lot of time over the years writing about what women know about war. That's why so many of the demonstrations against the Iraq War swarmed with women. I would love for you to talk a little bit more about that, if you would, because women can talk about women, but I do actually like that you centered them in this book.
So I'm here particularly because of the second part of that quote. And my mother was consistently telling all the older men around her, who were sometimes twice her age, you guys just think Hitler is a crank and a nut and some kind of goofball, and everybody's going to come around to see that. And she was the one with a couple of others who said, no, you got to understand how serious this is. And it was the women of Berlin who really deserved the recognition for blowing the whistle first on what the Hitler threat was all about. Both my parents fled the Nazis in the 30s. Not all got out. We lost family at Kristallnacht and Theresienstadt. My dad is in the museum, the Holocaust Museum. He's the guy smoking a pipe and one of the Ritchie boys. But the men were just not getting it. And the women, with my mom and her friends, just seemed to be the only person on the planet I ought to dedicate it to, and I wouldn't be sitting on this stage if it wasn't for the fact that my mom and courageous Jewish woman told the world what Hitler was really up to.
So, Ron, when we look at that now, and when you look at the landscape, you're out there all the time. You're talking to voters all the time, your constituents. What are you seeing in women now? I'm
seeing another group of people who get it, and we probably wouldn't have had the budget problems if Patty Murray and Rosa DeLauro and a whole bunch of women could have just gone off and taken care of it. We probably would have taken Trump on right then and there, and I think we would be in a stronger position. Women forever.
Thank you, Ron. I think when we open up to questions, I assume somebody will ask about last week and what happened.
You think?
We can, yeah. So I want to read something. The book's about chutzpah, as you know, and he talks about Jewish scholars do recognize there is such a thing as bad chutzpah. And then he says, good chutzpah, by contrast, is vital and fantastic. He goes on, to be a good Jew, Rabbi Freeman says, to be a good Jew, you need two opposites, a sense of shame that prevents you from acting with chutzpah to do the wrong thing, and a sense of chutzpah that prevents you from being ashamed to do the right thing. Tell us what you mean by that.
Well, I'm not going to mention any names about who's using bad chutzpah, because I know you'd never think of it. But look, I wanted to say that good chutzpah has been a big feature of American success since the Founding Fathers. The Founding Fathers told the Brits to go fly a kite. Abe Lincoln basically talked about chutzpah, taking on the odds and working for racial justice. And then I think it's particularly appropriate, since we're having this debate about immigration, think about the chutzpah it took for people to come to this country and make this country what it is, because we have town meetings and people start fighting about immigration. And I say, how many of you are Native Americans? 3 hands go up. And then everybody says, why are you asking? Because everybody else is an immigrant. So you talk about chutzpah, those are part of our traditions, and good chutzpah, and we define it, and we have the rules, so you're thinking about playing the long game, and you block bad stuff, and you work for good stuff, but you recognize at the end of the day that chutzpah is for doing good. It's not for being misappropriated, bullying, and I think you have an idea who's doing that right now in America and why it's so important that we beat this program and beat it at the next big vote, and we can talk about that.
So, Ron, let me ask you a question here about the concept of chutzpah. How is it different from courage?
It's Profiles in Courage is the Kennedy kind of book. It is an example for, I guess, for our purposes that Jack Kennedy talked about, but it doesn't have the Yiddish tradition. It is very different. The Yiddish tradition melted eventually into Hebrew, and people gave Jews all the credit for chutzpah, But right now, you can open up a newspaper and you can see people of all faiths saying, we got more chutzpah than the other guys. Be for us, support us, do this. And so I think it's the tradition, the Yiddish tradition, that's really different.
To build on that for a moment, where are you seeing signs of chutzpah right now? If we're talking about where we are politically right now, does anything come to mind in particular?
Patty Murray and Rosa DeLauro last week. Patty Murray and Rosa DeLauro kept saying, look, we got a choice. We can let this go. Trump is going to be able to run around and do various things, or we can stand up and say we have to draw a line in the sand. And two women who've dedicated their lives to public service said, don't take a pass on this. Don't let this bully get a win right here. They were right, and I think we've learned a lesson as a caucus, and we're not going to do this mistake again. Two women.
What's the lesson that was learned?
The lesson was learned is, don't let a bully get a free ride. A bully was pushing everybody around, and you saw what Trump was trying to do to say, well, you're going to blow up the government, and we all said, are you kidding me? What he passed is a really deeply flawed thing. I mean, he's now saying that he's in charge of the Army Corps of Engineers, for example, which talk about power, is extraordinary. But two women tried to do the right thing, and it took a lot of chutzpah because they got a lot of flack for it, and they were right.
Sure.
Okay. One of the things that surprised me in leading up to the election last year, but really leading up to the 2022 and 23 elections, when Roe v. Wade was overturned. And I guess maybe it was naive, but I thought that when we won big victories, there was some permanence. I didn't believe I'd live in a country where women had lost that right. I also didn't believe I'd live in a country that had a big part of voting rights carved out. I mean, once we won those victories, we as people who care about voting rights, we as people who care about women's rights, we won those victories over the last 50 years, and we thought there was some permanence to it. And then you look at what Coretta Scott King said, and I think I knew that quote but didn't internalize it, that every generation you've got to keep fighting for these rights. And that's what makes me hopeful about the future, even though this is a dark time. And what Ron said, it was an example to me that when opposed to the far right's extremist impulses, freedoms are not fully won, not ever. Not fully won, and I would add, not permanently won. So talk about that, if you would, Ron.
We love that. We love that passage.
Think about what it means for women's health care. I was a young member of Congress in 1990. I had a full head of hair and rugged good looks. And I talked my way into a committee that had never done the kind of work that Sherrod and I do all the time. I had the first hearings on mifepristone, which was, of course, this medicine as an alternative to surgical abortion. And my wife, who owns the Strand bookstore and is a big fan of Gwendolyn. Where is Gwendolyn? Because she hasn't gotten a round of applause yet. Let's give her one right now. My wife looked at this hearing and she said, this makes Saturday Night Live look conventional, because I had a big afro and gigantic glasses. And we basically beat George Herbert Walker Bush, not George Jr., on the scientific argument that we said then that drugs and these kinds of issues ought to be based on science rather than politics. And we did it because, as the book notes, Jesse Helms and others all filled the files full of, if you get this medicine, all the women are going to die. That's how we won 25 years ago. And what the book says, and what is so important about the fights Sherrod has made for working people year in and year out, recognizing that you've got to play the long game, which is one of the chutzpah rules as well. We are now having the same fight as we did 25 years ago, which is, what do you want? Do you want good, science-driven health policy, or do you want politics of the far right? And that's why it's so important that we have people like Sherrod in public life, because they recognize that Gesundheit, that if you get a win on Tuesday, you don't just go have a glass of champagne and call it a day. You've got to be prepared to come back again and again and again. And the choice on mifepristone now will be exactly the same as what it was 25 years ago.
So here's the thing. Some hear that and feel discouraged, right? That's why I love what you wrote. Sherrod and I talked about it. I said, wow, that really reminded me of Coretta Scott King when she said, with every generation, the fight is renewed. That can be very discouraging, or it can be really encouraging, right? Because the way I always try to think of it is, and as long as we stand up, we will always outnumber them, right? As long as we speak out and we stand up. But the concern lately has been how many are going to be willing to stand up. We were just hearing story after story, reading them, and I think Penn State, was it University of Penn or Penn State today lost funding? Yeah, I mean, I don't need, as a person who's teaching at a university, I don't need to tell you all the conversations of fear that are going on. What is it going to take, or am I misreading this? What is it going to take? Maybe they're already doing this in larger numbers. What will it take this time?
Let me tell you what seemed to go over pretty well last night. In Prineville, Oregon, a small community where Trump got 70% of the vote. And what I said apropos of Connie's point, where people said, oh my goodness, how are we going to ever get anything done? I feel so discouraged, I feel demoralized. And I said, look, political change hardly ever starts in Washington, D.C. and trickles down. It's almost always exactly the opposite. It's grassroots up. And we can point to these historical examples like, Abe Lincoln. Look at all the examples of Abe Lincoln losing again and again and again and finally prevailed. We're on the right side of history, and we can't sugarcoat it here. Sherrod and I and others in public life can't say we're going to win in the next 15 minutes. But the history is, if you're willing to stay at it and build these coalitions, the thing that went over last night is we had a big group of seniors there in a town with mostly Trump victories. And I said, how many of you know AARP members in other states? Everybody's hand went up. I said, can you all make calls to them in the next couple of days? Because we have the Social Security Administrator, who I think is a very questionable character, in front of the Finance Committee next week. And we're going to try to send some really strong messages. They all said, sure, give me the number, we'll make the call. So the point really is, we just need to lay out the kind of strategy that helps to win for a coalition. And last night, in a place where Donald Trump got most of the votes, people don't like where things are headed.
They're talking about closing Social Security offices, as you know, and making people stand in line. They're closing EPA sites in the most the areas that need the EPA more than anywhere, places in poor areas, poor rural and urban areas where where lead pipes and all of those kinds of things that create fetal damage and beyond. So there are so many people affected by this, and it's up to all of us to organize. I mean, if you live in Amelia Sykes' district, call her office and let her know you're behind her. If you're in another district, and you certainly have two senators that don't seem at all interested in fighting for these, I'll leave it at that. So,
I could go on.
But I want to illustrate sort of the history that Ron alluded to, and as many of you heard, maybe ad nauseum, I wear this lapel pin. It's a depiction of a canary in a birdcage, and it's it's about mine worker safety, but it's about much more. And you think in the 1930s, it wasn't like a bunch of about Wall Street saying, there's a lot of retired people that don't have any money. We ought to give them Social Security. And corporations didn't say, there are too many workers that they're older, they can't really. They don't really, that work is too hard. We ought to pass child labor laws, and we ought to pass worker protections. There were a bunch of people, insurance companies in the 1960s didn't say, seniors don't have insurance, we ought to pass Medicare. I mean, this all came, as Ron said, it comes from the grassroots. And when rights are, it's not just creating those positive things for people's lives, whether they're programs or whether there's some sense of justice. It's also stopping them from taking things away. And Ron talks about that in this book, stopping them from taking things away. And that's why you can organize. I mean, you just bury these offices in phone calls, and go to their offices and demonstrate. Go to a Tesla dealership maybe. And one thing Rachel Maddow does whenever she talks about Elon Musk, she doesn't just say billionaire like most people say, or rich. She says biggest Trump contributor every time. You watch Rachel Maddow, every time I've talked to her about this, biggest Trump contributor. And voters may not be totally outraged about all these billionaires, but they are when it comes to, here's a guy running the country after giving all this money to Trump. And so talk about that. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask,
And then we'll turn it to you guys for questions.
yes, I love your rules.
Oh, my goodness.
And my favorite one, I think, is number 8. Pay attention to your friends because they can be far more unpredictable than your enemies. I know, isn't that great?
Who likes being left alone? It's not a complicated subject. You know, you have good friends, and they don't want to hear that you went off and talked to A, B, C, and D and just ignored them. And I think that's human nature. So that's sort of what's behind that rule.
So, Gwen, moving quickly.
Okay,
is
Gwen.
Is giving us questions.
All right.
Softball's for me.
No, I'm good. Okay, so I guess you've answered we know you disagreed with Schumer on this last vote, right?
Here's the point on this, because I suspected that I would get this question
And let
about
me just
10
say,
seconds in.
And Ron, they're also asking, it connected to it, what is the most important thing we can do now?
Great.
Okay.
Well, I think the Social Security vote is coming up on Tuesday. I just confirmed that with the office. They're giving nobody any notice. So I'm telling everybody over the next few days we've got to organize. And we're going to try in all of these debates, particularly on the basis of what happened a couple weeks ago, is to offer some good policy, issues. So I'm going to say, next week that with respect to Social Security, I think we ought to raise the cap, and millionaires and billionaires ought to start paying their fair share. I wish Sherrod Brown was sitting next to me on the Finance Committee. It'd be easier. But here's the situation, with the caucus and the like. The number one priority for Senate Democrats is to end this brutal, lethal, illegal program of Donald Trump. That's priority number 1. Priority number 2 is to end this brutal, lethal program. Priority number 3 is to end the brutal, lethal program. You get my drift. Donald Trump would like nothing more than to have the Senate Democrats get distracted and go off and have this big debate and, so-and-so should be such and such and the like. There's going to be plenty of time for that. We're going to have more votes coming up that are really crucial, including the next debate when the time period comes up. We need to use this time, as Sherrod was talking about talking about the most important issues. And yesterday in Prineville, Oregon, this itty-bitty place, and I was there until the wee hours, and I got up at 2:30 because I said I get to be with my buddies, and this is going to be a great night. Let's come back to Social Security and veterans issues. On those two issues, these conservative Republicans in the Senate cannot defend the indefensible. And if we keep doing our job, we're going to win.
So this one, and I'm sorry, I should have identified. That first question was from Kat. Susan has a question, a statement and a question. Please tell us how to stop our democracy crisis. We need to act now before it is too late. So I think the question now is, you've been talking about what you're going to do in the Senate. What are the marching orders?
Well, apropos of what's coming up right now, Social Security, next Tuesday, in the Finance Committee, they're trying to drive this through before anybody knows what's going on. There's a lot of information out on this. We can get you more. But if you can contact your friends in other states, that's why I asked who was in AARP. What happened yesterday is a huge number of seniors in a conservative town said, we're going to be out there making the case that we don't like this. Do you know what Elon Musk said about Social Security? He called it a Ponzi program. Guys, I mean, if that's not energizing, the efficiency rate for Social Security is over 99% in terms of the right amount is delivered at the right time. So you got
Count the
Elon.
150-year-olds that are getting it?
Yeah. Can you believe that? I mean, he knows that that's false. Social Security has told him it's false, and he's still getting up. So
And here's how that's going to matter. I mean, it's hard. I mean, Ohio now has 2 senators who are going to do everything Trump wants. the new guy, Husted, believes that he knows if he votes against Trump, he could lose his primary in 2 years, so year and a half. So you know all that. But the real place, if people do what Ron suggests, if you start talking to people in other congressional districts and you start calling, you start showing up at their offices, and then the poll numbers start, as the year rolls on, the poll numbers say if the election were today, Republicans would lose 22 House seats. And that's going to happen because they've got to be more responsive to public opinion than senators in 6-year terms. When most Republican senators have very Republican states, then they're going to start to break off. And they're scared of, they're all scared of Trump now. They're scared of Musk money. They're scared of having Trump diss them in their districts. But they're going to be more scared. I mean, I know a lot of House members over the years, and they get scared pretty easily. And they get scared from that, but they'll be scared when people show up at their offices and tell them I want a town hall meeting. They're not going to do one. Maybe eventually they will, but they're going to be scared of that. And then they're going to see these numbers and huge numbers of people writing them and calling them. And the more you can do, I mean, this state has far too many Republican House members, not at all representative of the state, you know that. But you can put a lot of pressure on just in this region, let alone the rest of the state.
This question is for my senator, from Terry. Senator Brown, what do you miss about having a perspective from Desk 88?
Thank you. Did you write that?
I did not.
She did? Okay. Thank you.
Terry.
Thanks. Did you pay her? No.
I did not pay her. Can you just answer the question?
Real
This is
quick
going to be
background.
so much fun now.
My first month in the Senate, you get assigned, as the freshman, you get assigned there were 10 of us, the last 10 desks on the Senate floor. And when I sat down at my desk, I was just looking at where it is, really. And someone told me that senators carve their names in desk drawers. So I pulled out this one desk drawer, and it said McGovern, Gore, Hugo Black, and one just said Kennedy. And Kennedy had carved his name in the desk drawer, which people do a little bit like high school. And I went over to Ted, who lived another 2 years, and I said, which Kennedy is this? And he said, well, it's got to be Bobby's because I have Jack's desk. And I thought that was kind of cool. So I started thinking about this, and I ended up writing a book called Desk 88 about 8 progressives that held my desk. And
So that's not answering the question, though.
it's called a filibuster. Right.
What do you miss most?
What I miss is being in the arena and fighting for the things Ron fights for. I mean, I don't look back with regret. I was honored to represent this state for 18 years. I was never invited to the Hudson Library, but I'll get over that, Gwen, someday. It was an honor. And, as Ron pointed out, I cast in the House and Senate, I believe, 13,000 more or less votes. The penultimate, I always like to use that word, the penultimate, my next to the last vote was after midnight on my last day in the Senate, was to pass the Social Security Fairness Act. And Ron, the bill comes through his committee, 250,000 Ohioans benefit from it, and we did it. It took us 10 years to pass it. And so I was not going to, I did 2 things. And I didn't really have time to feel sorry for myself after the election. One, because I have an amazing family and a strong wife, and one of our grandchildren had a birthday the next day, and my birthday was Saturday after the election. And Connie went to Kent State. Connie and I rarely asked for anything for my birthday. I wanted a new guitar. I had like an Epiphone that was like $300, and Connie said, we're buying a new guitar. And so we went to, what's the name of the place? Yeah, went to Woolsey's in Kent, where you all know. You play there. And we bought a guitar I never, ever thought I'd own.
Can I just tell the story on the drive down?
Sure.
Because Sherrod really never does ask for anything. And back in August, he said, I would love a new guitar for my birthday. And when he first started dating me, he used to play songs for me all the time. So I thought, well, I'm in for that. Well, of course, we thought
This
it was
getting mushy.
Oh, stop. So we're in the car driving down to Woodsy's because my brother-in-law is a musician, and he said, whatever you do, do not pick out this guitar for Sherrod. He has got to play guitars and figure out which one he wants. So we're driving down, and I loved how Sherrod thought he was going to tell me what I could spend on it. And he says, all right, I just think we're not going to go past $1,500. I think I think that's a reasonable amount. And I'm just in the car thinking, I know how this is going to go, because as I said to him in front of 4 salespeople when he started doing that again after he found the Martin that he loved, and he looked at the price, and I said, husband, I have not been on a vacation in 2 long years, and I am a working wife, and this is the guitar I'm going to buy you. And he practices almost an hour every day.
And I practice about an hour every day. And now that I don't have to spend so much time raising money, if I spend that time practicing guitar, in 5 years, I'll be George Harrison. I used to say Eric Clapton, but he had a really bad reputation. Then I said Chuck Berry, and he had a bad reputation.
I kept saying to pick
But
somebody
George
we can
Harrison-
live with. Yeah.
So that wasn't really the question either. What was the question? Oh, so the last 2 months, the last 2 months of the election, after the election, I spent in office. I spent my time. We have 70 employees in the banking housing committee that I chair, and my personal office, and my chief staff and I and staff director met with pretty much all 70 of them for 15 minutes. What do you need? How can we make sure people land gently? Almost all of them have now. And the other was the Social Security Fairness Act. So come January then, I was invited to the White House for the bill signing. And one of the things I talked to the president's people about is I knew that this Social Security Fairness Act, the money would not come to people until February or March. And I knew Trump would take credit for it, even though he had nothing to do with it. So I talked to the president's people and said, let's do a bill signing. He signed it in December before the session was over. But let's do the first week of January. Had a huge bill signing with a whole lot of people that were affected from all over the country, including many in Ohio. So
I think part of the reason he's not answering it entirely is he's still trying to figure out what it means to not be behind Desk 88. And that's an honest response,
wait
right?
a second, because there's been all this bobbing and weaving on seat 88. I will tell you, I personally was so upset that seat 88 had changed hands, I moved out of the neighborhood entirely. I went to a completely different part of the Senate. I was sulking and still am.
Do we have time for one more? This is one that I hear from a lot of people, too. It's about dark money, and this is from Mary. Dark money is a problem. What can be done to limit election campaigning? And we're seeing, I think the Times had a story this week about how they're really trying to just gut, like Act Blue. They're really going after the ways that Democrats raise money to support candidates. And what do you suggest for this?
Well, I would like to see us take another crack as part of our affirmative agenda. In other words, one of the rules in Chutzpah is block bad stuff, work for good stuff. I think pretty soon here we ought to take another run at Citizens United, because I think that is an obscenity. And this time we ought to really dig in, and this issue that talks about Sherrod's work for working people goes into the way Trump is personally creating so much wealth around crypto and tokens and all this stuff, some of which gets pumped through his campaigns. We've got to take what was written about in this magazine and say, yes, Citizens United, but take the way Trump is piling up all this extra money and build it into a refurbished version of Citizens United, because Trump is making gazillions right now with all of these special little deals, because anybody who's a friend wants to set them up with a deal. It helps them, and it also allows Trump to say, oh, this is good policy, which of course it's not.
So, Ron, I want to give you the last word here before we set you out to start signing books. And I'm wondering, is there anything I haven't asked you that we haven't asked you, or anything in particular you think is important
Yeah,
to
I
talk
think
about?
something's important, and that is I want to see Sherrod Brown back in public life. And I realized I was taking my life into my hands, because I told them I was taking them out to dinner, and they know I'm going to talk about all kinds of political things. But look, Sherrod and Connie know that you love them. And we saw it as we came in, because I thought, again, I'd made the right choice. No Oprah, because I got much better than that. I want these two to have a wonderful life. But I want you also to know I've had a chance to work with Sherrod Brown for 3 decades, 3 full decades. And Connie and my wife owns the Strand bookstore in New York. They're women of letters. So you got to understand, you've got the gold standard in these two, and whatever works for them. I want everybody to know I'm ready to go back to Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland. Sherrod would call me up and say, I need you to come in. You got to work the burbs. We got to have somebody who can talk to Jewish people. And Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland are on my brain. So whatever these two want to do, I'm in. I hope all the rest of us feel that way. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. You want to go to the rotunda, they'll all be there to visit with and sign books. And by the way, you have an open invitation to play your guitar at the Hudson Library whenever you want.
You won't have me as a singer if you like.
Thank you all for coming. Please join us in the rotunda.